Well, we've run out of things to say. I I texted you about this. Just the other last night, I was listening to that Sam Harris thing on like consciousness, and just he's very into that kind of shit. Anybody that's interested in Sam Harris or knows about his writings and stuff, like he's got interesting thoughts on free will and consciousness and just, how the brain works type thing. And I was just so like kind of God, we have it just furthered me. I started thinking of like our Bloom conversation, the way that like critics use the word consciousness and what they try to mean by it.
What do you mean?
Uh, Basically, what Harris was saying was that we really have no idea where consciousness comes from, and he says it as terms of like the mechanisms of the brain that's still a mystery to us, kind of like if we define consciousness of just like having the lights on at all, like in terms of just a person being aware that they're a person kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we really know very little else about it, what it does, being aware of how and he used the example of speaking. So like you and I speaking right now, it's not like I'm consciously processing like all this stuff. I'm just talking and it's happening kind of thing. So I mean, I don't know. It just further cemented me into this kind of critics should not use that phrase to mean what they think they mean by it.
Yeah, I just don't know. I
If you're
think,
going to say expand consciousness, which is what a lot of critics like to say, I'm just like, well, what the fuck are you
but
even saying? Like, we don't even
yeah.
have a set definition of what the fuck.
Yeah, I get what you mean by that. I
Yeah.
mean, like if you think about like, well, and we can maybe get into this when we like start actually talking about Merwin, but fucking yeah, Bill was listening to this book. Yeah, I think he learned about because of Sam Harris or something.
Yeah.
But it was like, oh, fuck, I'll have to look up or ask him what it was. But it was interesting as shit. We were listening to it in the car. Um, and they were, basically like it was exploring like the what science there is, what like they're currently doing to understand consciousness and how it works. And there was this one thing. Basically, there were a bunch of studies that they were doing with, patients who were locked in or like in a vegetative state.
Right.
Um, and basically trying to figure out if they could determine how many people who were in quote unquote vegetative states were actually like conscious.
Right.
And how like, and therefore actually just like locked in instead of actually vegetative. And it was like fucking insane. I mean, like you're starting to see some of this shit come out now, but one of the things that they did was like basically like this girl who was they were trying to figure out if she was like in a vegetative state or if she had like fully if she had some awareness, and they basically had her like think about moving through the rooms of her house to mean like yes or something, and do like doing something else like playing soccer or something to mean no.
Huh.
And it was just really fucking interesting, dude. So basically, like, they now have a means for people to be able to communicate, even if, like, they have no, like, other way to reach out. Like, if they can't speak, they can't, like, really use
Right.
their face in any way.
All the natural unconscious things that our body does for us that we're not aware of, where you're just not doing them in a vegetative state, right? Like,
I'm trying to unfreeze my video.
yeah. Is mine frozen?
No, mine was, though.
It
I just
worked.
turned it off. Yeah, I just turned it off and back on.
Yeah, so it just got me thinking. I started thinking back to our conversation on Bloom with like, conscious, unconscious illusion and all this stuff. And I was like, man, it just further cements my kind of literary critics should not be using these terms. Like, we should not be using these to mean what we're trying to say, Because I do understand why they use it, right? Like, because we're talking about something that's very hard to articulate.
Oh,
Like,
dude, you'll never get away from like lib arts people trying desperately to understand science.
yeah, but not even like understand it. I just mean, science doesn't even really have an understanding of the thing they're talking about. And I know why they use it. They're talk because art is hard to
Yeah.
talk about. And we're mostly talking about our reactions to a piece of art. So this is why I like Bloom's idea of, it's all personal because you can only have a personal interpretation of an art. Like there is no like it's an individual reading something and reacting and interpreting it.
Yeah, there is all of that, but
And
also
he
like,
means that, and I guess consciousness and stuff is used as a shorthand to mean,
yeah.
your reaction or your kind of stimulation.
So you're talking about a context in which someone says like this poem will expand one's consciousness, for
Yeah,
example.
which is a common thing people say, right? Like, which is a common
Yeah, that
thing.
just they just mean expand your mind, which
Right,
is just
yeah. Which
a
means
saying.
teach you something, which means alter your perspective, which means stimulate you in some way,
I mean, it
excite
might
you.
even fucking mean change the, structure. It could mean change the structure of your fucking brain, and it would still mean the same thing. Like it doesn't, you know, it just it just means grow,
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is
mentally grow.
I don't
In
necessarily think.
some,
Well, I mean, we could call it growth. Yeah, we could call it growth. But yeah,
I just mean as in like it wouldn't matter if whether it was like, yeah, I don't know what I'm saying, but
yeah,
doesn't matter.
yeah.
Fucking, it's just people wanting to talk about like consciousness and like, I mean, it's the same thing when people talk about like all of the transcendental shit,
Right.
you know.
Transcendence. Yeah. It got me thinking, especially as we're reading Merwin this week, because he's very lofty in these kind of, like a lot of
Which
the.
I fucking love. That's my shit.
Well, I just mean like, yeah, a lot of the themes are big, lofty things and ideas that, yeah, it just got me thinking of like, okay, so when we're talking about this stuff, what are we saying? And it got me thinking of this thing of like altered consciousness and what do we do with that? Like how useful is that in terms of telling us whether a poem's good or not? Is it actually saying anything? Kind of like when we say that this poem expanded my consciousness, like what the fuck are we
I
saying,
don't think we're saying anything about whether, well, I mean, I don't think that's even a statement of good or bad. It's just what you, yeah, it's your personal sort of relationship to the poem,
Yeah.
right? Like I could read a poem that is technically awful, but has a phrasing in it that expands my consciousness.
I mean that's how I feel about Bukowski. I mean, I liked him a lot better when I was younger, but as I got educated in poetry and I understand why like kind of academic circles don't care for Bukowski because he's not very structurally or technically inclined. But man, that shit resonates. Like man, some of that shit just I still think about some of it. Like stuff that I read over a decade ago, 15 years ago that I still can remember and just be like, "Oh yeah, that captured something that stimulated me, that made me interested in this art form more, all that kind
That's
of
all it's
stuff."
got to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, well,
Capture
that's the thing,
something.
right? Yeah. So when we say expanding conscious, I just mean, yeah, we're putting something on the art again that it probably can't do, right? Like that we're putting a
Yeah.
limit on it that we think is helpful with talking about it, but I don't know how. I don't know. Whatever. I don't want to get bogged down with this. I was just thinking about it. I'm just rambling now with like my processing my thoughts.
I mean, it's all the same shit I feel like Ben Lerner thinks that he's doing.
Well, he's
Like when
another one where he.
in his sort of effort to, define sort of the culture's attitude toward poetry at any given moment, or why one may or may not be inclined toward poems.
Or just like in
And like what
Lerner.
he's trying, I think, in some way to capture and that like fell flat because it wasn't maybe done well is the thing about poetry that I think you hate, which is what you might identify as the like sort of abstract piece of it, which we could argue about the term. I don't really care about that, but I just mean like the thing the thing in poetry that seeks to like not always, but very often express something that is unexpressible and is hard
Right.
to pin down.
But I not even that. I just mean like, when we did our learner episode on his one essay, not that he's doing this in all of his works, but that one essay he put out that we did with the hatred of poetry. Episode 10 available at patreon.com/heavyboard. It's
Yeah, it's probably an inaccurate description of what
Well,
he was
he'll say
about.
transcendent and divine. We had a whole conversation about what he means by transcendent, reaching the transcendent. And I think he means the same thing as kind of expanding consciousness, right? So this big abstract term that can be used a bunch of different ways, and we really doesn't get us any closer to like understand, in my opinion, understanding. But it is talking about something real, right? Like that kind of
Yeah,
felt
yeah, yeah.
change that Bloom calls it, like that kind of we are feeling something here. We just don't know what else to call it, but like an expansion of consciousness
But
or like a
or the top of your
transcendence.
head being taken off.